So here we are back again at the stage. But what I want to do is make sure that we have some memory of where we started today, because I'm going to be building on the original talk, the first keynote that you heard today, delivered by Gurno. So if you remember back to 10 a.m. this morning, there were two main takeaways from that keynote. The first was that, let's call them agentic applications, right? Applications of this sort that use LLMs in order to process some question, to solve some task, in order to use tools with a certain degree of autonomy, that these are coming to the enterprise, but also, right, that they're different in some important ways, right? They're built in different components. They are using different services to be delivered. The second main takeaway is that, of course, in your organization, you're going to be purchasing some of these agents. You're going to be subscribing to the various offers that you're probably already getting from your CRM provider, from your various cloud providers, and so on, right? But at the same time, you're going to need to build some, and potentially a certain number, a large number of these, in your most strategic functions are going to need to be built in-house. And so the question is, how do we do that, right? And that's what I'm going to be talking about in this talk, right? Is that we need a new architecture paradigm for building agentic applications, and spoiler alert, that architecture paradigm is going to be the LLM Mesh. And so we're going to go deep on that. We're going somewhat into the future, right? This is not necessarily what you're going to be doing tomorrow, but given the speed of adoption of Gen AI across so many different dimensions, I anticipate that this is something that is going to be, if not on your roadmap this year, then certainly within the next 18 months. So let's start by breaking it down into components. I'm using the term agentic applications here. That's starting to get picked up in, in the literature, in the popular press. We talk about AI agents. These are applications that have a certain degree of autonomy in order to solve a task, given the limitations that we impose upon them, right? They are composed of many different types of objects, different components. And so what I'm going to do is draw a picture up here. Some of the rectangles are going to be green. Those are the ones that are specific to this new class of application. And the other rectangles are blue, right? And those are the things that we're already building applications with today. We're going to be doing this at 4 different levels. Level 1, data, 2, services, 3, logic, 4, application. Nothing new there. And of course, it all starts with your data, right? And so these are blue rectangles. This is what we're already building with. Unstructured data and structured data. I'm going to add, however, at that lowest level, at the data level, the actual LLMs themselves, right? And so here I'm not talking about OpenAI, OpenAI's GPT service. I'm talking about the model itself, so GPT 4.0 of a certain version, right? 2024, 10.04, or whatever it might be, right? This, of course, an LLM is in and of itself just a big file, or many files, with a lot of numbers in it. It's a vast simplification, but the reality is, if you're going to be running these yourselves, and I know that many organizations in this room are probably going to at least be exploring running and hosting your own LLMs, really running them is a data and an infrastructure question. So I put it down at that level. But in order to make it useful, you have to deploy a service on top of it. Now, so this is Azure OpenAI service. These are the various hosted services that you have access to. And these might be the services that you're setting up and running yourselves. In addition to that, we now have retrieval services, so RAG-based retrieval services that are taking structured data and converting it into, taking unstructured data, converting that into vectors and making it accessible then to those LLM services. If we continue, of course, we add a blue rectangle, data querying services, all of your different databases that you've always had, nothing new there. And I add another one, API services, which is obviously vast, but that's going to be one of the powers of this new architecture paradigm, is being able to tie into the entire host of API services that are out there. Those two, they come together in what we are going to consider tools that we're going to make available to these systems. Also then at the logic layer are prompts. So we've been talking a lot about, actually this morning I was speaking with one of our customers about code environments in Dataiku, how we manage code across, in their case, hundreds of users. A very real question that we've all been working with, are familiar with now for 10, 20, 30 years. Now though, we have a new form of logic, a new way to define the logic in an application, and that's in prompts. And so prompts are now going to be another enterprise asset, another part of your IP that you're going to be able to use and reuse across the organization. But of course, these lines don't converge yet. Where do they converge? They converge in perhaps the most important element on this diagram, and that's in agents. Agents are the logic. This object is where we define the logic of which LLM service is going to be using which tools to accomplish which task within which limits we're going to define for it, right? This diagram that we have here, of course, is a simplification. It's an architecture diagram and not a logic diagram. In reality, an agent might be connecting to multiple different LLM services, using and reusing different prompts in a more complicated flow. And then finally, right, all of this is then exposed up in an application. At that application layer, that's the UI that your users are actually going to be interfacing with. In other cases, it might be, let's call it headless, right? It might just be an API service, which is then exposed to other services internally or externally. But that would all be defined up at the application layer. So, okay, this is great. This is a nice diagram. I think that everyone is following. But the question is, beyond components, what kind of architecture paradigm is appropriate for building these type of applications, these agentic applications? And so what do I mean by architecture paradigm? Well, let's draw a comparison with the past. If we roll back to the beginning of enterprise IT, so we're talking 40, 50 years ago, the architecture paradigm were monolithic applications. We wrote, or our predecessors wrote, big applications that did everything from data access to querying to processing to the definition of the visualization framework. All of that was built into the code base of a single application. But that became unwieldy as we built more and more applications, so we broke it up into a services-oriented architecture, SOAs. This, obviously, for many of us in the room, this was the predominant architecture paradigm, at least when we were coming up into enterprise application development. These are web services. There was a lot of XML running around at that time. And this was, of course, dominant for actually many decades. Until finally today, we're now shifting over into microservices, and this is yet another architecture paradigm, which is defining how we should break up different services, how we should manage them, and so on. So this is the example of other traditional applications, and what you see is a move towards essentially breaking up the monolith of the application, decoupling it from the underlying infrastructure, and creating a level of abstraction within the architecture itself. So where are we at in terms of building agentic applications? Where are we at on this, this evolution? Well, of course, we're building monolithic applications. We call them chains in some cases because that sounds cool and it makes it sound like we're doing something new. But today, the dominant way, the predominant way of building an agent is you're going to probably start by importing LangChain, which works very well. You'll maybe Google or GPT some code. You'll chain things together. You'll test to see if it works, hopefully, and then you probably get a successful POC out of this, right? It's easy to build an agent in this way, which certainly seems to accomplish what you're attempting. At the same time, this is not necessarily a very stable or enterprise-ready way for building. We need to think about this differently, and this is where Dataiku is proposing the LLM Mesh as an architecture paradigm to overcome many of the challenges that this unwieldy approach brings. Now, to illustrate that, let's go back to our architecture. This, once again, are all of the different components that an agentic application may have within it. And so, like this, right, it's all very clear. Let's shrink this down. This is now an application running within your enterprise. And imagine that you are the digital COE, you're the AI COE, you've built this. It's accomplishing great things for the enterprise. The team that's benefiting from it is very enthusiastic, so much so that they're going and talking to all their friends about it as well, which is great. You get to go and build another one for another team. Or better yet, another team starts building one for itself, maybe even reusing some of these components. But if this is all built just in code, right, all of a sudden we go from this very nice, simple application architecture into something which gets quite a bit messier as we start sharing and interconnecting all of these different systems. Now, from a perspective of an enterprise where your concerns are security, performance, cost management, a diagram like this starts to look a little concerning. these are different applications which maybe are doing great things for the organization, but it's unwieldy. It's inefficient to manage something like this. And so what we propose within the LLM Mesh is a simplification for AI app development, monitoring, and maintenance, right? And so I propose it for those 3 different categories as well, in order to cover the entire life cycle of these applications. Once again, we need to get beyond building POCs of these applications and start building really production-deployed applications that are running on top of these agents that we're able to build ourselves. So the LLM Mesh has 3 main principles. The first is to access the LLMs themselves and the related services through an abstraction layer, through a secure gateway, which centralizes all of those connections. You don't want all of those different keys, all of those different connections being maintained in each and every one of those different applications. It's inefficient, it's insecure, and it's not the right way to be building in the enterprise. The second point is that you're going to have a lot of common services that are going to be required for all of those different applications. For each and every application, you're going to need authentication, obviously. You're going to also need probably some sort of cost monitoring and budget control. You're probably also going to want to have some services to moderate the content which is being generated by those LLMs. You don't want to redevelop or re-implement those different capabilities for each and every application. You want to be able to use a common services backbone for all of them. And then 3 is that you need to have a centralized discovery and documentation portal or registry for all of these different applications. Now, we're all familiar with the importance of registries in terms of models, catalogs in terms of data, feature stores, right? That's all serving humans. And of course, this would serve our human users as well. But importantly, in the context of agentic applications, it's all the more important so that the agents themselves, these AI capabilities, are able to go and discover other systems, if they have the permission to do so, of course, and to learn how to use them based on the documentation which is made available. This is where this process really becomes scalable, is by having a very strong registry and catalog, which allows both the humans and the machines to be able to access these systems, again, within the confines of the permissions that you grant to them. So, from that mess, the LLM mess, we get to an LLM mesh. And so ultimately, what the LLM mesh looks like is a catalog and gateway where you have access to all of those different objects and services that you're going to be building with. Your LLMs, your LLM services, your retrieval services. Your developers then have all of these different components available to them. They don't have to worry about connecting to it. They don't have to worry about getting it approved by IT. If you have given them access to it, it means it has been approved, right? So that they can immediately start building their applications, their agents, with these off-the-shelf components which you've provided to them. At the same time, you're also then providing these federated services, these shared services for control and analysis. Everything from access control to content supervision, cost control and monitoring, performance, relevance, all of it is provided centrally. So again, those app developers, the teams that are actually building those agentic applications, don't have to worry about building that, implementing a new method, if it's already been provided for them. And the result is a way in which you can build an entire ecosystem of agentic applications which are built on common components using federated services in a structured and manageable way. And so ultimately, we think that this is a better way to start building these agentic applications. And as I said at the beginning, right, this might seem perhaps a little bit futuristic, right? That today, you might just be struggling getting your first agent, your first Gen AI POC off the ground. That's normal. That's where a lot of organizations are today. But it's important to not go too far in one direction and then have to backtrack and rebuild in another direction. So we wanted to share with you today, of course, this vision so you can start anticipating where you might be in 6, 12, or 18 months from now. To help you with that, we're writing a book on the topic. So we have chapters 1 and 2 are available now, and we'll have the rest of it available at the beginning of the year once we finish writing it. But this is going into a lot of technical depth about the way that you can actually build these in LLM Mesh or use the Dataiku LLM Mesh to do it. So we're very excited about that. I'll let anyone with a camera out scan the QR code before I switch to the next slide. And then, of course, even though we're proposing LLM Mesh as a generic architecture paradigm, Obviously, Dataiku is a product company. We're also going to be offering and already have a significant portion in our product offering of our implementation of the Dataiku LLM Mesh, which is, of course, a turnkey version of everything that I've just presented. This starts, of course, with that secure gateway with all the connectivity that we already provide. On top of that, we provide the GenAI app development framework with everything from our code-free recipes, prompt studios, our Dataiku answers, chat interface, and app development framework, as well as then those federated services to provide all the cost control, all the security that you definitely need. All of this in combination with our GenAI governance as part of our overall governance suite. So this is something new, right? We're actively working on developing a lot of these components. Everything that you see on the screen is available today in the product today, at least in the latest version. So if you haven't updated it to that latest version, you may want to now. More is coming in our next releases, and even more is going to be coming after that as well. This is a huge area of investment for Dataiku, and that's because we believe firmly that this future of agentic applications is going to be where you're going to be focusing a lot of your development efforts in the years to come. So thank you for your attention, and I'm handing it back to Grace to lead us to the panel, I believe.